Of course, this brings us to a discussion then, of course, is how do we decide on what is the ecology of the population? And it's also looked at in various ways of looking at it and considering it. And one of the most common ways looked at is look at a kind of a degree of complexity within the area. What is it that decides on the level of complexity? What it decides on the level of importance of it? And therefore, there are a number of factors we look at within a population. And one of the things that decides the complexity and rate of change will depend on how quickly can new firms and new organizations be founded and how quickly do others die off. So, for instance, if you look at the natural world, you talk about slow levels of change in populations such as giant tortoises, etc., which exist for 200 years, and so they have very few generations over a long period of time, and yet very fast evolution in creatures that live only for a day, such as mayflies, who can be evolved very quickly in the lab through many, many generations to make changes. The founding rates, fertility rates, and of course it depends on the rate of that. A steady state where you have as many people being born as dying, you'll have population stable. But obviously, most population you either have higher founding rates, in which case you have a growing population, or higher mortality rates, in which case you have a declining population. This population ecology, this is the way the level of conflict within an area, the level of competition between firms, etc., will affect that. If you get high levels of competition, you get very fierce fighting with things. You'll get potentially attracting new markets because very profitable areas, but also that the many high mortality rates as companies fail within these areas. So that can affect with there. The community ecology is how long does the community as a whole perceive? How does that persist? Do we have a market that lasts for a long period of time? Some very long-lived markets. We also have some brief in the technology industries, in some of the service industries, and the management industries. You get communities that arrive and disappear very, very quickly. So the community as a whole may not be very persistent. This can affect the speed at which you develop that. So let's look at this, the level of complexity within a thing. So on an individual basis, firms are the markets are very uncomplex, but individual companies within a firm, individual within the organisation will tend to have their own way of doing things, and it can be very easy to learn how to do that, but there's very little interaction. But of course, as the population gets bigger and things spread, then it becomes more difficult to work out do that. So within a larger population, you could say actually, and this link, this is the complexity starts to get, and this link between founding and mortality rates, the population starts to get more complex, and the final highest level of complexity, of course, is within the community as a whole, and of course the greater number of relationships between developing with things. And we break this down into another way of looking. Hannah and Freeman looked at this organizational ecology, and they said, well, of course, individuals as members of that, we have a much more simplest approach. We can understand fully, perhaps how, or to a great extent, how one individual operates, and of course, individuals cluster together to make subunits. And these are smaller subunits within an organization that allow people to work together to do things. And again, we can see very little numbers of transactions between them, very little number of interactions. It's very easy to draw up a map that covers most of these. But as we look at individual organizations, they can be so the complexity internal to them because of the relationships they have with the members of that organization, but actually this complexity isn't as great perhaps external to them. The organizations can be a lot simpler on the external basis from that. But of course, as we get population of organizations and groups of organizations operating together, then of course a great degree of complexity and the difficulty of figuring this and the effect of bounded rationality and the ability to understand this complexity is greatly reduced until finally we've got whole communities and the way they interact and all the different complexities of that and the different ways of operating between them and the multitude of connections within the network that make it very, very difficult to follow and work out which are the easiest, which are the most straightforward ways of doing things. So, what can we say then about organizational ecology? Well, it provides us clearly with a selection orientation. We actually have some way of actually looking at it and saying how do we decide which groups will survive, which groups will not. One level of organizational ecology argues that actually, of course, generalists will always be outperformed by specialists because the reality is a generalist might be good at a large number of things, but with the same level of resources, each individual will always be somebody better than them at any individual thing. So any company that starts to promote too general will should by specialists. This, of course, would suggest that companies should need to get very good at one thing or a few things to make sure they operate well in a market. Because if they say, well, actually, we're good at 100 things, there'll always be somebody better than them at any one given thing. And of course, it emphasizes that a certain type of organization will fit better within any given market. So the organizational composition will be favored by the environment, by the effects of that. So organizations you'll see this. So you tend to have So all airlines look the same from outside, sort of like a lot. Schools or universities look the same from outside. We get this pressure to conform that organisations should not be too difficult. And so we see this that so certain companies are known as certain types of operations, sort of with geographical as well. So German companies very good at heavy engineering, very good at chemicals and things like that. You get French companies very good at sort of the high tech industries, sort of the nuclear uh, railways, etc., things like that. And you also get sort of the Japanese, who use a skilled microelectronics, things like that. You see this types of the environment where they're structuring these compositions and to make organisations all look similar and operating a similar manner in the same area.